Good evening and welcome. Tonight we will be going over the history and geography of Adamawa State in Nigeria. Now don't be confused because we just did Adamawa, Cameroon. Next is Adamawa, Nigeria. Two very different places but with a lot of shared history. But geographically, Adamawa, I think, is a lot more mountainous than its counterpart in Cameroon. It does have a lot of beautiful river valleys and the Adamawa Plateau, of course, but along the border here, and especially down here in the south, it is very mountainous. You can see the Gashaka Gumti National Park comes up into Adamawa, and it's a very thickly forested mountainous kind of park. Very beautiful. But Adamawa's landscape is mostly known for its beautiful valleys. You can see the Benue River, one of the major rivers of Nigeria, cuts right through, especially through the capital city of Yola. There's also the Gongola River that only really comes down to here. It's a very huge river, but it meets the Benue here in Adamawa. And there are lots of interesting little towns and cities all throughout in these valleys. Normally I would show you them on Google Earth, but unfortunately it doesn't look like much from above, and there aren't very many good pictures of it on Google Earth. So no Google Earth tonight, unfortunately. I really scoured because Nigeria is such a beautiful place. I really wanted to show you. I forgot I have a boo-boo here. Just ignore that. So the history of Adamawa is a very interesting one. If you saw the history of Adamawa in Cameroon, the early histories are very similar. There were many, many different ethnic groups living in this area in its early history. Most of them were nomadic herders, but there were quite a few farmers. The most important one we're going to talk about in history is the Fulani. But first we're going to talk about Sukur, which is up here. Actually, it's more like up here. Up here in the northern mountains of Adamawa. And the Sukur cultural landscape is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So we're going to read about it. It says, the Sukur cultural landscape with the palace of the Hidi or chief on a hill dominating the villages below, the terraced fields and their sacred symbols, and the extensive remains of a former flourishing iron industry, is a remarkably intact physical expression of a society and its spiritual and material culture. You can see one of the huts here along with a wall that was built out of stone, and what looks like here's some kind of storage, maybe for food or to keep cattle in or something. Now the pictures on UNESCO's website don't work. If you click on them, it just takes you to a blank website. So I pulled up some pictures on Google Images so you can see a better look at these really cool huts, the area, the wall that they built. They're farming along the hills, and just a very interesting, very intact little ancient village. Probably looks just like it did hundreds of years ago, which is pretty neat. So, talking about that first and foremost, that's just one example of one of the ethnic groups that lived in Adamawa before contact with the Europeans. But something happened in this region before European contact that vastly changed the entire dynamic of the area. And that was a jihad begun in 1804 by Usman Dan Fodio. He was a Fulani leader who didn't like the fact that the Islam that had been introduced long ago from the Kanem-Bornu Empire was being mixed with cultural traditions and things like that. He wanted just straight Islam. So he launched a jihad all throughout this area here to either get people to convert to full-on Islam or get out. And in this area in particular, there was a leader named Modibo Adama, and he was sort of like Usman Dan Fodio's right-hand man in this area, and he pretty much led the major battles in this area here. So once the dust settled from that, the Sokoto Caliphate was firmly established here. Modibo Adama got to have this land. So it was named after him, Adamawa, and he set up his capital here in Yola. And it stayed that way for quite a bit until the European contact. The Germans and the British moved into the area. It was just mainly just small camps of German explorers, a British explorer here and there. But once they were like, yep, this land is great for taking over, they swooped in hard. And of course, the Sokoto Caliphate, which controlled the area, was not happy about that and resisted as hard as they could in what's known as the Adamawa War. But the Europeans won out. The Germans and British split the area between them, so this half became part of the Northern Nigeria Protectorate, which was a British territory. It would eventually, in a couple more decades, merge into British Nigeria, an official colony of Britain. The chiefs who are still in power to this day are known as the Lamidos. You can see the big cool Lamido Palace in Yola to this day. Sadly, no good pictures of it on Google Earth. So disappointing, but the Lamidos were kept in charge. It was like the British, Lamidos, everyone else, right? The Lamidos were the ones who were apparently in charge and who seemed to make the rules just to kind of fool the locals into thinking that they still had total control of their land, but the Lamidos had to do everything that the British said, basically. And of course, they weren't very happy about it. So once independence came about, it was very exciting. The early Nigerian government split the country into three halves: the northern, eastern, and western. Since the northern was primarily Hausa Fulani Muslims, the east was primarily Igbo, who were primarily Christian, and the west was primarily Yoruba, who were also Christian. But that just led to a lot of conflict. So the capital was moved to the center of the country, to Abuja, and they broke things down not by culture and religion, but by geography. So this became the northeastern state. Eventually, once they broke it down even farther, it became Gongola state, which was all of this here. And eventually, in 1991, once Nigeria was finally, to an extent, fully democratic, it was split into Taraba and Adamawa. And that is the state that we have today. It's pretty big in terms of Nigerian states. Most Nigerian states are little teeny tiny guys, like we already went over Abia. Not a very big state compared to these larger ones. But Adamawa is not very populous. To this day, it is still a pretty agrarian state, sort of the breadbasket for this region of Nigeria. It's where most of the food is grown, and is their biggest export is crops, agriculture, and of course the cattle. Recently, in the past decade, mainly in the early 2010s, I have to be careful with my words because YouTube, an Islamic fundamentalist group known as Boko Haram gained a huge following in this area of Nigeria, and they launched attacks throughout, including in Adamawa. The last big one was, I believe, in 2015 in the capital area here. It doesn't show it on this map, but there are lots of really big suburbs. Some of them are bigger than Yola in this area. So they really struck in this area. But since 2016, it's all but stopped in Adamawa. Today, it's a very safe, very peaceful place to visit. It's not totally considered a tourist spot. I always look up travel videos on YouTube, and most people traveling in Adamawa were there to see their family. Like, they weren't there to be tourists, but they were filming the markets and all the little towns and things and the beautiful scenery. So it's not like people flock to Adamawa for vacations. It's just more of a very laid-back, agrarian kind of place. And that is where we are today. And I'm going to end it there. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this to be very interesting and would like to see more, please consider subscribing, because this is going to be a very long ongoing series where I go over every territory in the world in alphabetical order. Next, we're going to be heading to Turkey, and that's going to be a very interesting video. So again, if this is your thing, if you really enjoyed this, please consider subscribing. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this video relaxing and educational, and I hope that you have a very good